Hey, you know what's been cracking me up lately? My buddy Micky got his YouTube channel going.
Oh, yeah.
Mickytolife.
Yeah.
Seriously, you got to check it out. It's just him, like, trying things.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Nice. Always good to see friends putting stuff out there. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Speaking of big things happening.
Yeah, we've got some pretty weighty topics for this deep dive, right?
We do. We've been digging into this narrative coming out of China, this whole East is rising, West is falling idea. Sounds kind of dramatic.
It does, and it's definitely something being pushed pretty consistently by officials and state media there.
Right.
We looked at a bunch of sources, official reports, global analyses.
Okay, so let's unpack that. East rising, West falling, or Dongcheng Xizhang, I think.
That's the one. Essentially, it's the concept really pushed since maybe 2020 or so by Xi Jinping and others.
Right.
That the Eastern world, specifically led by China, is on an upward trajectory, gaining power, influence.
And eventually going to overtake the Western world, led by the U.S., sort of a modern East wind prevails over the West wind vibe.
Exactly. It echoes that older idea, but on a grander global scale. And they believe they have reasons for this confidence.
Okay, so why are they so confident? It can't just be talk.
No, they point to specific things. A big one was the initial response to COVID-19 back in 2020.
Ah, right. While, the U.S. and Europe were really struggling, China had that super strict zero COVID policy.
And their economy actually bounced back relatively fast. They were, I think, the only major economy with positive growth that year, according to the World Bank.
Yeah, I remember seeing reports like in the People's Daily basically saying, look, our system works, the West is kind of lying flat or giving up.
That contrast definitely fueled the narrative. Seeing their 2.3% growth versus, minus 3.5% in the U.S., minus 6.4% in the EU, it looked stark.
And it feeds into their broader economic story too, right? They're number 2 globally now.
Huge economy, $18.3 trillion GDP, something like 17.7% of the world total this year, based on IMF figures. That's substantial.
And it's not just size, it's the tech advancements they talk about. 5G, Huawei's got a massive market share.
Or half the global market, yeah. That's a big one. And AI, too. They're leading in patent applications globally, something like 40% last year.
Wow. I've seen mentions of some of their AI startups like DeepSeek doing advanced stuff, and of course the high-speed rail. You see pictures, it looks incredible.
Their infrastructure build-out has been immense, and it connects to their global push as well. Think about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right, BRI. Even with criticisms, it's definitely extended their reach. Lots of countries involved.
The summit last year had over 130 nations, huge pledges. And then there's the expansion of BRICS.
Yeah, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the new members, making it BRICS plus or whatever they call it now.
Yeah, exactly. Now 10 nations. It's positioned as, an alternative power center to the Western-led G7.
So they're building their own club, basically. And they look west and see problems.
Oh, yeah. They point to things like the really high U.S. debt to GDP ratio, over 120% now.
And all the political infighting, like the debt ceiling debacles.
That too. Plus, slower growth in the EU, the energy crisis impact, the war in Ukraine. They frame these as signs of Western weakness or decline.
Okay, so that's a confidence side. But you mentioned it's maybe unrealistic.
Well, several reasons. First, the idea of Western decline is often exaggerated. The U.S. is still a powerhouse.
How so?
Its economy is still significantly larger. $27 trillion this year? It's way bigger than China's. And in key tech areas, especially foundational AI.
Like OpenAI, Google.
Exactly. The U.S. still leads in that core innovation. Plus, the military strength, the global financial system, the dollar's dominance, these aren't easily replaced.
Right. It's not like flipping a switch.
Not at all. And the narrative often conveniently overlooks China's own internal challenges. Well, youth unemployment has been a serious issue. It peaked over 21% last year, still high around 15% now.
Oof, that's tough.
And the real estate debt crisis, Evergrande, Country Garden, those are huge potential problems looming over the economy.
Right, the property market woes.
Plus demographics. Their population is aging rapidly and actually starting to shrink. The UN projects a significant drop by 2050, with a huge proportion of elderly people.
That puts a strain on everything long term. And their growth has slowed down too, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's still growing, maybe 4.55%, but that's quite a bit slower than the boom years. So it's not quite the unstoppable juggernaut picture they sometimes paint.
Okay, what else makes the West falling part seem off?
Technological dependence is a big one. Despite all the progress, China still relies heavily on Western tech, especially for the most advanced semiconductors.
The really high-end chips for AI and stuff.
Precisely. And U.S. export controls, like the restrictions on NVIDIA's top AI chips, are specifically designed to hinder their progress there.
So they can't easily get the best tools.
It's a major bottleneck. And key manufacturers like TSMC in Taiwan have stated they won't produce their cutting-edge sub-7 nanometer chips for China. That's a serious constraint.
Yeah, that's like trying to build a Formula One car, but only having access to standard engines.
Good analogy. Then there's the international relations aspect, that wolf warrior diplomacy.
The really aggressive confrontational style.
Yeah. It might play well domestically, but it's definitely strained relationships abroad. Negative views of China are pretty high in many developed nations, according to Pew Research.
So it makes it harder to build alliances and trust.
Absolutely. And actions in places like the South China Sea cause friction with neighbors like the Philippines and Vietnam. It risks isolation and weakens their soft power.
Being the loudest voice doesn't always win friends, huh?
Often doesn't. And finally, there's the question of ideology and innovation, especially in AI. China's state-controlled approach, where AI development has to align with specific political goals and socialist values. That might stifle the kind of freewheeling bottom-up innovation you see more of in the open U.S. ecosystem.
Like, if you're worried about crossing lines, you might not take risks on really breakthrough ideas.
Exactly. It could limit creativity compared to a more open environment. So, yeah, the East rising, West falling narrative is, well, it's a narrative. Reality is far more complex.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not so black and white. Which leads us perfectly into the next big question, AI. Is China actually at risk of being left behind in the age of AI?
That's a critical question right now, given how fast AI is moving. And China certainly has some major strengths in this area.
Like data, right. They have what, over 1 billion internet users? That's going to generate insane amounts of data.
It's enormous. 1.08 billion users this year. That data is fuel for training AI models, a huge potential advantage.
And the government is pushing it hard.
Very hard. It's a top national priority. Xi Jinping emphasizes it constantly. They have this whole nation system approach, pouring resources into AI development, setting targets in Politburo meetings.
So massive data, strong government backing. What else?
They're already very advanced in applying AI in many fields. Yeah. Think smart cities, surveillance systems like Skynet, e-commerce, fintech. AI is deeply integrated in many ways.
Yeah, you hear about facial recognition payments and stuff.
Yeah. And they have a massive pool of talent. Huge numbers of STEM graduates from top universities like Tsinghua and Peking. Plus, many leading AI researchers globally, even in the U.S., are ethnically Chinese.
Okay, so lots of potential, but you also flag the risk of falling behind. What are the big obstacles?
The biggest one, as we touched on, is the core technology gap, particularly in AI computing power. The hardware.
The chips again.
The chips again.
Yeah.
They lag significantly behind the U.S. in designing and manufacturing the most advanced semiconductors needed for cutting-edge AI. U.S. firms like NVIDIA dominate that high-end market.
And the U.S. sanctions make it hard for them to buy those chips or the equipment to make them.
Correct. It severely limits their access to the processing power needed for training the largest, most powerful AI models. Their self-sufficiency is still quite low in this critical area.
So they might have the data and the people, but not enough horsepower to really compete at the absolute frontier.
That's the core concern. Another challenge is the innovation ecosystem itself.
What do you mean?
The regulatory environment. Rules around data privacy, yes, but also content censorship. The requirement that AI content must align with socialist core values.
Right, we mentioned that. How does that hinder things?
It could potentially limit the flexibility and openness needed for rapid breakthrough innovation compared to the more open source culture in the U.S., with platforms like GitHub and Hugging Face where researchers freely share code and models.
If everything has to be pre-approved or fit a certain mold, it might slow things down.
It could. Then there's the issue of international collaboration, which is becoming trickier.
Because of the tech blockades and geopolitical tensions.
Exactly. The U.S. is actively trying to limit China's access to technology and expertise. And we're even seeing shifts, like Middle Eastern countries, say the UAE, with its G42 AI firm, choosing to partner more closely with the U.S. That weakens China's global AI network.
Then are they losing talent, too?
There's definitely a brain drain issue. Many top Chinese AI researchers and engineers prefer to work in the U.S. or other Western countries.
Why is that? Better pay. More freedom.
Often a combination of factors: higher salaries, greater academic freedom, access to the leading global research community, maybe fewer restrictions.
So summing up the AI picture, China has huge data, government support, lots of applications, and a big talent base.
Definitely strong potential, especially in applying AI.
But they face serious hurdles in core hardware, maybe a less flexible innovation environment, reduced international cooperation, and keeping their top talent at home.
That captures it well. The risk isn't necessarily that they'll be completely left behind across the board, given their market size and policy focus. But failing to overcome these challenges, especially the semiconductor bottleneck, could mean falling significantly behind in the most advanced foundational AI capabilities.
Okay. A complex race for sure. Now, let's shift gears a bit. There's another comparison that pops up sometimes. India.
Ah, yes, the India versus China discussion.
Yeah, specifically this idea that India could actually overtake China as the world's second largest economy. Some even use language like India crushing China. Is there anything to that? Seems ambitious.
It's definitely ambitious, especially the crushing part. But the comparison is being made for some understandable reasons. India does have significant strengths and momentum.
The demographics seem like the biggest one. They overtook China in population last year, right?
They did, about 1.42 billion people. And crucially, India's population is much younger. The median age is around 28 compared to China's, which is closer to 38 or 39.
That's a huge difference. A young workforce, lots of future consumers.
Exactly. It's often called the demographic dividend, providing a long-term tailwind for labor supply and market growth, while China faces the opposite trend of aging and shrinking.
And India's economy has been growing faster than China's recently.
Yes, significantly faster. Growth rates around 6.57% in the last couple of years compared to China's 4.55%.
Wow, so the gap could narrow.
Potentially. The IMF projects India's GDP hitting maybe $5.9 trillion by 2030, and some projections see it over $10 trillion by 2040 if high growth continues.
And they have that strong tech and services sector too, right? Bangalore, the Silicon Valley of Asia.
Absolutely. They're a global hub for IT outsourcing, with major players like Tata and Infosys. We're also building capabilities in AI, software, fintech. It's a dynamic sector.
Plus, geopolitically, they seem to be in a pretty good spot.
Increasingly so. They have generally friendly relations with the U.S. and the EU. They're seen as a key strategic partner, partly as a counterweight to China.
Which probably helps attract investment.
Definitely. You see companies like Apple, even potentially Tesla, looking to increase manufacturing in India as part of a China Plus One strategy to diversify supply chains.
And the government there is pushing reforms, like Digital India.
Yeah, the Modi government has implemented reforms like the Goods and Services Tax, GST, and initiatives like Digital India to modernize the economy, boost digital payments, and increase internet access. So there's definitely momentum.
Okay, lots of positives. But it still feels like a massive leap to talk about overtaking, let alone crushing China. What are India's big hurdles?
There are quite a few significant ones. Infrastructure is probably the most visible gap.
Roads, power, ports.
All of the above. It lags way behind China's extensive and modern infrastructure. That impacts efficiency, logistics, manufacturing.
Speaking of manufacturing, is India as strong there?
Not nearly. Manufacturing is only about 14% of India's GDP, whereas in China it's closer to 28%. China's massive integrated industrial base and supply chain dominance are hard to replicate.
So India's strong in services, but maybe lacks that huge industrial engine China has.
That's a fair characterization. Education and skills are another challenge.
Oh, so?
While they have top talent, the overall literacy rate is lower, around 74% compared to China's near universal literacy. Higher education enrollment is also lower, limiting the supply of high-skilled labor needed for advanced industries.
And inequality, does that play a role?
Yes, significant poverty persists, and the legacy of the caste system can still hinder social mobility and equal opportunity for many.
What about the government itself? You mentioned reforms, but is it as effective as China's system at getting things done?
Generally, no. While democratic, India's bureaucracy can be slower, less efficient, and face issues with corruption. Policy implementation can be weaker compared to China's highly centralized, top-down system, which can mobilize resources very quickly, for better or worse.
So good ideas might take longer to actually happen on the ground.
That can be a challenge. And then there's just the sheer scale difference.
Right. India's economy today is, what, $3.9 trillion? Compared to China's $18.3 trillion.
Exactly. It's only about 1/5 the size. Even if India grows much faster, catching up takes a very, very long time. The gap is enormous.
Decades, probably.
Likely decades. The IMF still sees China's economy being over $20 trillion by 2030, still way ahead. Plus, India faces its own geopolitical risks, like border tensions with Pakistan and China itself.
Okay, so let's talk timelines. Is India crushing China possible? Short term, say 5-10 years.
Highly unlikely, almost impossible. China's economic scale, industrial might, technological lead, and role in global supply chains are just too dominant right now.
What about midterm, 20, 30 years?
That's more interesting. If India consistently maintains high growth, say 6-7%, and China slows down significantly to maybe 3-4% due to its structural issues, then India could certainly narrow the gap substantially. It might become the world's third largest economy by, say, 2040 or 2050. Overtaking China is still a huge ask, though. It depends on India fixing its infrastructure, education, and maintaining stability.
And long term, 50 years plus.
Theoretically, anything's possible over half a century. If India fully realizes its demographic potential, leverages its geopolitical advantages, and makes huge strides in development, while China faces prolonged stagnation. It could happen. But crushing still sounds like hyperbole. China has immense resources and resilience.
And how does AI factor into this India-China dynamic?
India's software strength and English skills could be an advantage in AI services in certain applications. But as we discussed, they lack China's massive data scale and hardware foundation.
So China likely stays ahead in the core AI race, especially if they solve their chip problem?
Probably. If China overcomes the semiconductor sanctions, their combination of data, investment, and application focus gives them a powerful edge, likely keeping them ahead of India in overall AI capability for the foreseeable future.
Wow. Okay, so pulling it all together, this has been a lot to digest.
It really has.
The whole East rising, West falling narrative from China, it reflects real confidence from some big achievements, but it seems to overlook some major internal challenges and perhaps exaggerates Western decline. So largely unrealistic in its strongest form.
Agreed. It's more complex than that simple binary.
And for AI, China has huge potential, especially in applying it, but faces serious risks of falling behind in core technology due to those chip dependencies and maybe a less open innovation climate.
That's the key tension there. Application strength versus foundational weakness.
And then India. Huge long-term potential thanks to demographics and geopolitics, growing fast.
Definitely a rising power to watch.
But facing massive hurdles in infrastructure, education, and just sheer economic scale compared to China. So the idea of them crushing China anytime soon seems pretty far-fetched.
Very far-fetched in the near to medium term. Closing the gap is the more realistic, though still challenging, goal for India.
It really drives home how complicated these global shifts are. It's not a simple sports match where one team clearly wins.
Not at all. It's a multi-dimensional game with technology, demographics, economics, politics, international relations, all interacting in complex ways, and everything is constantly in flux.
Makes you think, doesn't it? It kind of makes my head spin trying to picture what the world order will look like in, say, 50 years, with AI accelerating everything.
It's incredibly difficult to predict, which actually leads to a good question for you, the listener, to ponder.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Considering these rapid advancements in AI, the shifting demographics we talked about, and these evolving global dynamics between major powers, what do you think will be the truly defining factors of global power over the next 50 years?
Like what will matter most? Tech, economy, population, alliances.
Exactly. And maybe a follow-up thought. How might individuals, just regular people, prepare for or adapt to the kind of world those changes might bring?
Whoa, that's a deep one. Definitely something to chew on. Well, this has been fascinating. Really appreciate you helping unpack all this.
My pleasure. It's crucial to look beyond the simple narratives and understand the nuances.
For sure. All right, everyone, that's our deep dive for today. Hope you found it as thought-provoking as I did. We'll catch you next time.